It's not easy to find a starting point. Maybe I should start from my childhood, because that's where everything started to take shape. Growing up in a family like mine was anything but simple. The dynamics between us were a complex tangle, a tangle of conflicting emotions. Sometimes we were too close, almost incapable of breathing without each other, while other times we seemed like two complete strangers, divided by an invisible wall. My sister and I were inseparable, but there was always a subtle competition that accompanied us, a desire to excel, to be seen, to be the best. It was as if each success of one overshadowed the other, yet our bond was unbreakable. And then there was him, Uncle Alessio, my mother's younger brother. His presence was irresistible, charismatic, magnetic, capable of capturing the attention of anyone who entered the room. It was as if he had a special light, an energy that never allowed me to take my eyes off him, as if he held secrets that I desperately wanted to discover. His travel stories, his contagious laughter, everything about him seemed to exude an aura of mystery that fascinated me deeply. If you want to find out what lies behind those secrets and how this story will take an unexpected turn, subscribe to the channel. Over time, I grew up, got married, built my life. My husband is a good man, truly. Maybe even too good, too predictable, too self-confident. He seemed almost bored with everyday life. I, however, wasn't at all. I was looking for something, emotions that would make me feel alive. I felt that my life was flattening out, that routine was turning off a part of me, that adventurous part eager to discover the world. I never wanted to betray him. It wasn't premeditated. But circumstances sometimes build up until the dam gives way. It all started with a family dinner. It was one of those rare occasions when the whole family got together. Alessio, with his usual relaxed attitude, was there, glass of wine in hand, chatting with everyone. His stories always managed to capture attention. He made his life seem so fascinating and free. My sister Julia was the center of attention as always, and I observed her from afar with a mixture of envy and desire. She had always had that natural charisma, the ability to make everyone laugh, to attract attention effortlessly. The evening continued with toasts and laughter, and at the end of the evening, when almost everyone had gone to bed, only the three of us remained, me, Alessio, and Julia, with an almost empty bottle in front of us. The wine had relaxed us, loosened our defenses, and opened the doors to confidences that we would normally have kept to ourselves. The conversation became more intimate, more sincere. Julia confided in us, talking about her marriage and the distance she felt with her husband. It was difficult to hear her talk like that, to see her so vulnerable, she who had always been the strongest. Alessio, on the other hand, boasted of his still being a bachelor, as if freedom was the only thing that really mattered. I don't know how it happened, but the conversation turned into a kind of challenge, a dangerous game, and the tension was palpable. It was as if we were all playing a game that none of us knew how it might end. Then it happened. Julia approached Alessio, joking about something, but I saw the way she looked at him, the desire shining in her eyes. I felt a knot in my stomach. Was it jealousy, or was it excitement? When their eyes met, something inside me clicked. Maybe it was the effect of the wine. Maybe it was the curiosity that I had always repressed. It was as if there was a magnetic force between us, something that pushed us beyond the limits. I approached too. The innocent jokes turned into bolder gestures, almost without us realizing it. The laughter faded, full of tension. Alessio was there, between me and Julia, and there was an energy that moved between us, something forbidden, intoxicating, Every movement seemed full of meaning. Every word, spoken or unspoken, added weight to that suspended moment. Julia was the first to break the silence with a nervous laugh, which betrayed her embarrassment. He looked at Alessio, then at me, as if he wanted to see how far we would go. When Alessio touched my hand, looking for a reaction, she did nothing to stop him. In fact, she encouraged him with a knowing look. It all seemed so unreal to me. I felt my heartbeat speed up, and the warmth of Alessio's contact sent shocks down my spine. At that moment, everything seemed possible, and at the same time incredibly dangerous. It was as if we had crossed an invisible line, a line that I knew I should respect, but was somehow drawn to cross. Julia's eyes became darker, full of a curiosity similar to mine. Alessio seemed amused, almost as if he knew exactly what was happening and was the director. Every gesture, every look, contributed to building a tension that seemed on the verge of exploding. I felt the need to get even closer, to challenge that boundary, to find out what would happen if I allowed myself to go further. The night continued in a crescendo of glances and touches, until the words lost meaning and only breaths and heartbeats remained. Alessio seemed to want to attract us both into his world of freedom and disinhibition, and in that moment, even if only for one night, it seemed to me that I could be part of that same freedom, that I could really feel life flowing through my veins. There were no more constraints, no rules, no fears, just the three of us, suspended in a moment that I knew we would never be able to relive again, but which in that precise moment seemed like everything I needed. We should talk about it. Alessio got up and approached me calmly, almost amused by my hesitation. About what just happened, I don't think there's much to say. Those words struck me deeply. There was no remorse in his tone, just a sort of indifference that made me feel even more guilty. I looked at the bed, the mess of the sheets, the clothes scattered here and there. I felt like I was in a parallel reality, far from my daily life, from my marriage to my husband, from my perfectly tidy home. Alessio seemed completely at ease with what had happened, while I felt as if I had been sucked into a vortex of conflicting emotions. I knew I would have to make a decision, that continuing down that path would be the point of no return. Yet something inside me was still attracted to that dangerous game. I didn't say anything. I dressed in silence and left the room, trying to regain control of myself. In the kitchen, I found Julia making coffee. We didn't even look at each other. The silence between us was dense, full of everything we weren't saying. As I poured myself a cup, I finally heard his voice break the tense atmosphere. "Don't think too much about what happened," he said, without turning towards me. "It was a mistake, but it's not the end of the world. It wasn't that simple. I had crossed the line and wasn't sure I would be able to go back. But before I could get lost in my thoughts any further, the kitchen door opened and my husband walked in, unaware of everything. He kissed me on the cheek, smiling as if nothing had changed. His very normal and familiar gesture made me feel even worse. I looked into his eyes, trying to hide the turmoil I felt inside. How could I look him in the eye from now on, knowing what I had done? I felt broken, torn between desire and guilt, between my family and the secrets that I could no longer hide. How would you have dealt with such a situation? Would you have confessed the truth, or tried to move on without revealing anything? Share your thoughts in the comments. The day went on as if everything was normal, but inside me it was chaos. Every time I caught my husband's eyes, I felt a tightness in my chest. He acted as usual, unaware that his trust had been irreparably betrayed. I was good at pretending, better than I ever thought, but the weight of the secret was starting to become unbearable. Every gesture of daily life, every laugh shared, every meal prepared together was a constant reminder to me of what I had done. Days passed before I saw Julia and Alessio again. Our family was used to seeing each other infrequently, so I could avoid their presence without arousing suspicion. But I knew I couldn't do that for long, and when we finally met again, the nervousness was palpable. It was a Sunday lunch at our mother's house. Everyone acted normally, as if nothing had happened. Julia, always bright and full of life, seemed perfectly at ease. Alessio, on the other hand, kept that enigmatic smile of his, and every time our eyes met, I felt myself burning with shame. During lunch, there was a conversation that fluctuated between trivial topics, but I couldn't concentrate. I felt Alessio's gaze on me, and it seemed to me that Julia was also observing me from afar, as if we were sharing an unspeakable secret. My heart was pounding, and the tension was growing with each passing minute. The buzz of voices around me, the sound of cutlery meeting plates, all added to my sense of unease. After lunch, while everyone moved into the living room, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Julia. She was putting away the dishes, and I tried to avoid her gaze, but I knew we should talk. "Julia, we can't continue like this," I finally said, my voice trembling. "We have to find a way to fix this situation." She turned to me, leaning against the sink with her arms crossed. Her face was serene, almost indifferent, as if the issue didn't affect her in the slightest. "Fix what? Nothing too bad happened, little sister," he replied with a forced smile. "It was one night, one time. Just don't think about it anymore." His levity made me angry. How could she be so cold? How could he ignore the weight of what we had done? His ability to separate emotion from reality made me feel even more isolated. Yet there was a part of me that envied his lightness, his ability to leave everything behind. "It's not that simple, Julia. You are my sister, and Alessio he is our uncle, and I have a husband." She sighed, as if she were talking to a little girl she couldn't understand. "You're making it difficult. It was a one-off thing between consenting adults. End of story." I felt the tears welling up, but I blinked them back. I couldn't believe he was downplaying everything like that. His words resonated in my mind, like a constant echo that tormented me, as if his contempt for the gravity of the situation was a further condemnation. But before I could answer her, we heard the kitchen door open. Alessio entered with a bottle of wine in his hand, looking first at Julia, then at me. "So, what are you talking about so seriously?" he asked with a knowing smile on his lips. Julia shrugged. "Nothing important, just sisterly nonsense." I remained silent, unable to hold his gaze. My body trembled under the weight of shame. But Alessio didn't seem to care. He approached us with his usual confident attitude, as if nothing could touch him. "We need to put what happened behind us," he said, in a calm but firm voice. "It won't do any of us any good to think about it too much." His words, so similar to Julia's, made me understand that I was alone in this. For them, it was just a game. For me, it was an abyss into which I was falling deeper and deeper. Every night I thought about what had happened. I relived every moment, every touch, every look, and I wondered how I could ever go back. But at that moment, I didn't have the strength to resist. There was a constant weight in my chest, a sensation that prevented me from breathing freely. The world around me continued to spin, yet I felt immobile, frozen in that moment of error, unable to move forward or go back. I was torn between the desire to confess everything and free myself from that burden and the fear of destroying my family, Every unspoken word, every lie told to protect my double life made me feel more and more trapped. Every time my husband looked at me with love, every time Alessio gave me a knowing look, I felt the weight of what I had done pressing more and more. I realized that no one could ever truly understand, that this secret would accompany me forever. And while I tried to appear normal, to be the devoted wife and loving sister, I felt my soul crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of hypocrisy. Time passed, but the wound remained open. Every meeting with Julia and Alessio was a reminder of that night, of what we had done and what we had lost. Yet, in my mind, I kept searching for a way to move forward, to find a balance between what I had been and what I had become. I knew I had to make a decision, but every time I tried to take the first step, something held me back, as if I were a prisoner of my own emotions. My heart was divided, and the road to redemption seemed further and further away. I couldn't even find the words to reply. The next few days were a nightmare. I tried to concentrate on my work, on my daily life, but every time I was alone, the memories of the night with Julia and Alessio came back to me, tormenting me. I saw my husband unaware of everything. I didn't know how to get out of that spiral. Talking about it with anyone was impossible. Who could understand me? Who could have forgiven me? I felt like I was collapsing under the weight of my secrets, and the more I tried to ignore them, the more they haunted me. The memories were like a poison that slowly spread, poisoning every positive thought. Even the simplest things, like making breakfast or answering a work phone call, were unbearable for me. My mind did nothing but go back to that night, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the complicit looks of Julia and Alessio again. I tried to keep busy, to immerse myself completely in my responsibilities, but it was no use. Unanswered questions tormented me, and any attempt at normality seemed in vain. One evening, while my husband was out on business, I received a message from Julia. "Come to me. We need to talk." The tone of the message was more serious than his usual casual messages. My first instinct was to ignore it, but I knew I had to face it. Maybe there was a solution. Maybe we could really put an end to this. I arrived at his house with my heart in my mouth, not knowing what to expect. Julia welcomed me with a worried look, different from usual. He sat me down on the couch and we were silent for a moment, until he decided to break the tension. The silence between us was tense. Every second seemed to last an eternity. Julia finally opened her mouth, but the words seemed to weigh like stones. "I can't pretend it's nothing anymore," he began, staring into my eyes. "What happened was a mistake, I know, but there's more." His words scared me. What did he mean? I thought we had already hit rock bottom, but his tone made me realize there was something even more serious that I didn't know. "Julia, what are you trying to tell me?" I asked her with my voice shaking. She stood up, pacing the room as if searching for the right words. Finally, he stopped in front of me, his face serious. His eyes were full of emotion, something I couldn't fully decipher. Fear, remorse, maybe a hint of shame. "It wasn't just one night," he confessed. "Alessio and I, well, we've been in a relationship for a long time. What happened that night was just a moment in which you were involved, but he and I continued to see each other." I felt faint. The whole world seemed to collapse on me. I couldn't breathe. How could he hide something like that from me? And why did they want to involve me? My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all, but it was impossible. Every thought seemed fuzzy, like I was trapped in an endless nightmare, my heart beating so hard my chest hurt. "I don't believe it. It can't be true," I whispered. shaking my head. It is, unfortunately, and I know this will hurt, but you had to know. I can't hide it anymore. I sat there, unable to say or do anything. Everything I thought was my world was falling apart. Not only had I cheated on my husband with Alessio, but now I discovered that my sister, who I trusted the most, had been having an affair with him for some time. He had betrayed me in the deepest way possible. His words seemed to echo in my head, each sentence a blow that took my breath away. The silence between us grew heavy, broken only by my ragged breaths. I tried to absorb the information, but it was as if my brain refused to accept it. Julia, my older sister, my point of reference throughout my life, was involved in a secret relationship with our uncle. And I was just an accident. I was a mistake in a plan already designed by others, and this awareness made me feel useless and betrayed. "Why?" he finally managed to ask with a broken voice. "Why did you involve me? Why you, of all people?" Julia lowered her gaze. "I don't know. Maybe for the thrill. Maybe because Alessio has always had a soft spot for you. Or maybe because deep down, I thought we were more similar than I imagined." His words seemed to sink into me like sharp blades. They left me breathless, without anything to hold on to. Similar. She and I are the same. She had always been freer, more carefree, more selfish. I had always tried to be the right one, the one who followed the rules, and now I found myself stuck in a labyrinth of lies and betrayals that I could no longer control. Anger began to boil inside me. Julia had used me. She had taken advantage of my weakness, of the confusion I was in at that moment, and for what? For his perverse game with Alessio. The emotions overwhelmed me all at once. Pain, betrayal, anger. I jumped up from the couch, feeling the tension in my hands as I tried to maintain control. "Similar? Do you really think we are similar?" I said, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. "You had fun behind my back, Julia. I can't believe you've gotten to this point." She shrugged with a half-smile on her lips, which made me even more angry. She seemed almost pleased, as if my words didn't affect her in the slightest. "It wasn't a matter of fun, and I don't expect you to understand. Maybe it was a mistake, but it's happened now." "Was that a mistake?" I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. "You involved me in an absurd story. You betrayed your partner. You betrayed me, and now you want to dismiss everything by saying it was a mistake." My body trembled, every fiber of me tense like a string ready to snap. Julia didn't answer immediately. His gaze dropped for a moment, then back up to me, but this time there was some sort of challenge in his eyes. "Yes, it was a mistake, but there's no use dwelling on it. It happened, and we need to move on." There was a coldness in his tone that sent shivers down my spine. How could he be so insensitive? Move on? Those words sounded absurd to me. How could we just move on after everything that had happened? How could I look my husband in the eye knowing what I had done? And how could I still have a relationship with my sister, knowing what she had hidden from me for so long? I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, unable to take a step forward or backward, trapped in that moment. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, feeling that words would change nothing, that nothing could repair the damage that had been done. I ran out of his house without looking back, my heart heavy and my mind in turmoil. I felt lost, as if everything I knew no longer had any value, as if everything I had built had vanished in an instant. I came home to find my husband sitting on the couch, watching TV. He greeted me with a smile, but I couldn't return it. I felt that our marriage was now a farce, that every gesture, every word between us was empty, meaningless. His words of love, his attention, everything seemed fake, as if I was living a lie. Every time he tried to talk to me, I felt a weight in my chest, a sense of guilt that ate me from the inside, and I wondered if I would ever be able to tell him the truth, or if I would live forever with this secret that was destroying me. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed. The images of Julia and Alessio continued to torment me. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped in a dead end with no way out. I wanted to confess everything to my husband, but I knew he could never forgive me, and at the same time continuing to live a lie was destroying me. The following days were hell. I tried to avoid both Julia and Alessio, but their presences continued to loom over me like a constant threat. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, and every time my husband spoke to me or touched me, guilt came over me, making me feel like I was drowning. I felt empty. Every daily action required enormous effort, and normality seemed unattainable. Every time I caught my husband's eyes, my heart broke a little more. I felt that my lies separated us more and more, like a wall that became higher and thicker until it suffocated me. One evening, while we were having dinner, my husband looked me in the eyes and asked me sweetly, "Everything okay? You've been distant lately. It seems like you have something on your mind." His worried look hurt me. I wanted to tell him everything, free myself from that burden, but I couldn't. I couldn't destroy his life like I had destroyed mine. "Yes, everything is fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just a little stress at work." He nodded, accepting my answer, and continued eating, but I knew my lie wouldn't last long. My world was falling apart, and it was only a matter of time before everything came to light. Every gesture, every word exchanged at the table seemed full of tension. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, and every moment was a new risk of falling. The weight of the lies became unbearable. With each passing day, I felt like I was losing myself, consumed by remorse and shame. I tried to move on, to ignore what I had done, but the guilt was too great. I woke up every night sweaty, with my heart pounding, unable to go back to sleep. Every shadow in the room seemed to remind me of my mistake. Every sound in the night brought to mind the words I hadn't said. One morning, after a sleepless night, I looked in the mirror and realized that I could no longer live like this. I could no longer pretend to be the devoted wife while everything inside me was falling apart. I had betrayed the trust of the most important people in my life, and there was no going back. I felt older. The deep, dark circles under my eyes told of all the pain I was feeling, and my eyes seemed devoid of light. I made a difficult but necessary decision. I had to free myself from that web of lies, even if it meant losing everything. That afternoon, while my husband was home, I sat across from him. He looked at me with that usual loving look, but this time I knew it would be the last time. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "I have something to tell you, something that won't be easy to hear, but I can't hide the truth from you anymore." He stared at me, confused. He didn't know what to expect, but he sensed the gravity of my words. My hands were shaking as I told him everything, about that night with Julia and Alessio, about the betrayal, and about the unbearable weight of guilt that I had carried with me ever since. Every word was like a stab. Every confession was a piece of me that broke away and fell into the void. The expression on his face slowly changed, from disbelief to anger, and finally to pain. He didn't speak right away. He remained silent, as if trying to figure out how to react. The silence was deafening, and every second seemed like an eternity. "How could you?" he finally asked me, his voice cracking. "How could you do this with your sister and Alessio?" I didn't have an answer. There were no excuses. There was no justification for what I had done. I just shook my head, unable to hold his gaze. He got up, grabbed his things, and left the house without saying a word. I knew he would return, but not to stay. I had destroyed everything we had built together, and now I had to face the consequences. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to signal the end of everything. Julia never contacted me again. Our relationship was now beyond repair. Alessio also disappeared from my life, leaving me alone to manage the disaster I had created. In the following days, I received a letter from my husband informing me that he had started divorce proceedings. There was no final confrontation, no discussion, just silence. I was left alone with the weight of my choices. I had lost everything: my husband, my sister, my family. I was left with my regrets, knowing that there was no way back. Every time I looked at family photos, those happy images seemed to belong to a past life, to a person I no longer was. The only thing I could do was move forward, trying to rebuild a life from the rubble I had created. But one thing was clear. From that moment on, I would no longer live a life based on lies. The days passed slowly and silently. I clung to the little things: making coffee, tidying up the house, going for a walk. They were simple actions, but somehow they gave me a sense of stability, as if I was trying to put the pieces of my shattered existence back together. Even though the price to pay had been very high, I had finally found a kind of peace in freeing myself from everything that had oppressed me for so long. Every morning I looked for a reason to get up, even if it was small, and every evening I promised myself to keep fighting, not to give up. Maybe I could never get back what I had lost, but I could try to build something new, a new me, more sincere and aware. And maybe, one day, I would be able to forgive myself. If you want to receive new videos of the series, write "I want the sequel" in the comments. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive a preview of the next publications. Thank you.